Lila walked out of Elias's office, her heart heavy with doubt and pain. His plea echoed in her head, but the book in the library and Clara's whispers had planted an indelible seed. Elias might betray her as he had Clara. She couldn't stay, couldn't risk her life for a man who held so many secrets. She returned to room 13, packed her backpack, and decided to leave Ravenswood again. She stepped outside, a thick fog enveloping the grounds, but she didn't stop. She walked through the woods toward the bus stop, each step heavy with her love for Elias. But then a sound came from behind her, quick footsteps, and Elias's voice called out, "Lila, wait!" She turned to see him rushing through the fog, his face tense, his eyes glowing in the darkness. "You can't go," he said, grabbing her hand and pulling her closer. "Not now." "Why not?" Lila growled, pulling her hand away. "So you can keep using me? So I can die in your ritual? I don't trust you anymore, Elias." He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes desperate. "I didn't betray you," he said. "I know what the ritual entails, but I'm trying to change it. I told you, I won't let you die." Lila backed away, tears welling up in her eyes. "But you're not sure, are you? You betrayed Clara, you let her die because you were scared. How do I know you won't do the same to me?" Elias knelt before her, his arms around her legs, his head bowed. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "With Clara I was weak. I wasn't strong enough to save her. But with you, I'll die before anything touches you. Trust me, Lila, just one more time." She looked at him, her heart aching. She wanted to believe and hold him, but the fear was too great. "I can't," she said, her voice choking. "I need time." But before she could turn away, Elias stood, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her, a desperate, fierce kiss, as if he were trying to hold her with all his strength. Lila responded in a moment of weakness, her hands tightening on his shirt, but then she pushed him away, stepping back. "Don't do this," she whispered. "Don't make it harder for me to leave you." She turned away, walking quickly through the woods, tears falling silently. But as she walked away, a dry laugh rang out from the mist. "Clara," her voice triumphant. "He can't keep you." Lila shivered, feeling Clara's presence more potent than ever, as if she were relishing their pain. Lila huddled in room 13, her backpack still on the floor after she'd decided not to leave Ravenswood. The encounter with Elias in the woods had shaken her, his pleas, his desperate kiss, and she realized she couldn't leave him, even though the fear still clung to her. But she didn't have time to think about it. A sudden blast of cold air filled the room, the window flew open, and Clara appeared, her white dress torn, her eyes staring black. "You can't have him!" Clara screamed, her voice echoing from the dead. Before Lila could react, Clara lunged forward, pulling her into a vision, a cold, dark basement where Clara stood in the middle of a circle of runes, blood dripping from her hands. Elias was there, younger, panicked, screaming, "Clara, stop!" But as the red light flared, he backed away, leaving Clara to be swallowed by the darkness. Lila screamed, waking up on the floor of her room. Clara was standing over her, her sharp nails raised. "He abandoned me," Clara whispered, her voice full of hatred. "And he will abandon you." The door burst open, and Elias rushed in, holding a rune. "Clara, enough!" he shouted, raising the rune. He chanted the spell, but Clara was more potent than before. She turned on him, throwing him against the wall, and Lila screamed as he fell, blood pouring from his forehead. Lila lunged at Clara, not thinking, punching the air. "Leave him alone!" she screamed. Clara laughed hoarsely, grabbing her by the neck and squeezing. "You're weak," Clara whispered. "He can't save you." But Elias stood up, his hands shaking, using the blood from his wound to draw a symbol on the floor. He shouted the final spell and white light erupted, pushing Clara away from Lila. She vanished, but her scream echoed. "No one escapes Ravenswood!" Elias knelt beside Lila, holding her close. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't want you to face her." Lila gasped, leaning into him. "I don't want to lose you." she said, her voice choking. But Clara, she won't stop. Elias held her tight, his eyes dark. I know, he said. We have to finish the ritual, together. I won't let her take you from me. Lila nodded, but Clara's words echoed in her heart, a reminder that the darkness still awaited and that their love might not be enough to overcome it. Lila stood beside Elias in his office, the candlelight flickering on his desk, illuminating his determined face. After Clara's attack, they both realized they couldn't live in fear any longer. They had to face the Ravenswood curse or leave it all behind. But Lila knew deep down that running away wasn't an option. Elias took her hand, his deep blue eyes fixed on hers. We can go, he said, his voice hoarse. Leave this place, leave Clara and the curse behind. She looked at him, her heart wavering between love and fear. Do you think we can escape? She asked, her voice shaking. Clara won't let us go. And the other spirits, they chose me. Elias bowed his head, his hand tightening on hers. I don't know, he admitted. But I can't bear it if you stay and get hurt. I'd rather die than let you face the ritual. Lila backed away, tears welling in her eyes. But if we run, the curse will never end, she said. Clara will continue to hunt us. We must end it, here, now. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with pain but also determination. Okay, he whispered. But if we do the ritual, I need you to promise me something. What? Lila asked, her heart pounding. He pulled a silver knife from his shirt, the blade glinting in the candlelight. If I fail, he said, handing it to her. If I cannot protect you, use this to kill me. I don't want to live if you die. Lila took the knife, trembling, the cold metal spreading through her hand. I can't, she whispered, but Elias took her hand, forcing her to hold on. You must, he said, his voice firm. Promise me. She nodded, tears falling, though she knew she could never do it. They left the office, hand in hand, and walked out into the Ravenswood grounds. The fog was thicker than ever, like a living wall blocking them. Elias led her through the woods toward the basement where the ruined door waited. But as they got closer, the fog swirled, and a terrible screech rang out. Clara appeared before them, her eyes flashing black, her arms raised as if to tear the air apart. You cannot run, she cried, her voice echoing. You belong to Ravenswood. Elias pushed Lila back, raising the rune, but Clara was more potent than before. She threw him into a tree, and Lila screamed as he fell, blood pouring from his mouth. Elias! She lunged, but Clara blocked her, grabbing her by the throat and choking her. You won't have him, Clara whispered, her nails digging into Lila's skin. But then Elias stood, his hand shaking as he traced a symbol in blood on the ground. He shouted the spell, and Clara vanished, leaving Lila gasping on the forest floor. Elias knelt beside her, holding her close. We can't run, he said, his voice hoarse. You're right. We have to end it. They stood, stepping into the cellar, the silver knife heavy in Lila's hand, a reminder of her promise. Elias took her hand as the ruined door loomed before them, his gaze determined. Together, he said. Lila nodded, and they descended into the darkness, unaware that Clara and the other spirits were waiting for them below. The cellar was cold, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and old blood. Lila and Elias stood before the ruined door, the red characters glowing as they approached. Elias spread a circle of white chalk on the floor, placed candles in the corners, and pulled the silver knife from Lila's hand. This is the moment, he said, his voice low but trembling slightly. We will break the curse, or die trying. Lila nodded, her heart pounding. How do we begin? She asked. Elias cut his hand, blood dripping onto the circle, and gestured for her to do the same. Lila slashed her hand, the blood mixing with his, and cold air rushed into the cellar as the ruined door shook. Elias began to chant the spell, his voice echoing in the cramped space, and the characters on the door glowed, emitting a screech like the cries of imprisoned souls. Then Clara appeared, not just a ghost but a powerful being, standing in the center of the circle, her black eyes flashing. "You can't win!" she cried, raising her hand, and a gust of wind threw Elias against the wall. He fell, blood streaming from his forehead, but he struggled to his feet. Lila lunged at Clara, silver knife in hand. "Leave him alone!" she shouted, stabbing at her, but the blade sliced through the air. Clara was not human. She laughed dryly, grabbed Lila's hand, and twisted her wrist. Lila screamed in pain, and the knife fell to the floor. "Lila!" Elias lunged, pulling her away from Clara, but she was stronger than ever. Clara raised her hand, and other spirits emerged from the darkness, thin figures, red eyes, screeching as if to tear them apart. Elias held Lila close, drawing a protective circle around them with his blood, but the circle weakened under Clara's attack. "You can't save them," Clara whispered, her nails scratching the air, making the circle vibrate. "He'll die, and so will you." Elias looked at Lila, his eyes full of pain. "You're the key," he whispered, his hand shaking against her cheek. "Open the door, use your will. I'll hold her back." Lila shook her head, tears falling. "I don't know how," she screamed, but Elias kissed her, a desperate brief kiss, then rose to face Clara. He raised the rune and shouted the incantation, and white light erupted, knocking Clara back. But she laughed and lunged forward, digging her nails into his chest. Elias fell, blood pouring from his wound, and Lila screamed, rushing to hug him. "No!" she cried, pressing her hands to his chest, trying to stem the flow. "Don't leave me!" He took her hand, his breathing weak. "Open the door," he whispered. "You can do it." Clara stood there, smiling triumphantly, but Lila felt a strange power welling inside her. Love, desperation, and the will to survive. She stood up, her hands stained with Elias's blood, facing Clara, ready to fight to the end. The basement shook with the power of the spirits, their screeches echoing like a cacophony of death. Lila stood in the center of the ruined circle, Elias's blood still on her hands, her breathing ragged as she watched him lie motionless on the stone floor, blood streaming from the wound in his chest. Clara stood before her, her black eyes glowing, her triumphant grin threatening to consume her. The other spirits, thin silhouettes, their red eyes glowing, moved closer, claws raised as if to tear at her. Lila clutched the silver knife Elias had given her, her heart pounding. "Open the door," he had said before he fell, and she felt a strange power surge through her, a combination of love, despair, and the will to survive. She raised her hand, Elias's blood dripping from her hand to the floor, and shouted, "Stop!" A red light erupted from where the blood hit the ground, knocking Clara back. She fell, her eyes filled with shock, her scream like broken glass. Lila turned to Elias and saw him open his eyes weakly, smiling. "I knew you could do it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. But he didn't move, the blood continued to flow, and Lila realized he didn't have much time left. Clara stood up, her voice cold. "You think you can beat me? Elias doesn't want to free me, he wants to bind me forever in the darkness." Lila was stunned, turning to Elias, her eyes full of doubt. "Really?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You tricked me?" Elias pushed himself up, blood dripping from his chest to the floor. "Yes," he admitted, his eyes pained but determined. "I don't want to break the curse and free all the souls. I want to bind Clara so she can't hurt anyone else. She cursed me when she died, and I thought if I kept her in the dark, I could protect you, Lila." Lila backed away, her heart breaking. "So everything you said, about breaking the curse, about loving me, was a lie?" she cried, tears welling in her eyes. "You used me to get back at Clara?" "No!" Elias roared, reaching out to her despite his weakened body. "I love you, I do. I want to break the curse, but not by setting everyone free. I want to keep you safe. I couldn't bear to lose you like I lost Clara." Clara laughed loudly, her laughter echoing like knives cutting through the air. "He's lying," she whispered, stepping closer to Lila. "He never loved anyone but himself. He wanted me to be bound so he could be free, and now he's going to sacrifice you to do it." But then Lila remembered the old book in the library. Only true love can break the curse. She looked at Elias and saw the love in his eyes, even though he had hidden it from her. She turned to Clara, her voice firm. You are wrong. He loves me, not you. And I will prove it. She stepped toward Clara, her hands stained with Elias's blood raised, not to attack but to confront. I forgive you, she said, her voice trembling but firm. You loved him, and he hurt you. But I will not let you drag him into the darkness again. Let go, Clara. A white light burst from her hand, not from the blood, but from her compassion and love for Elias. Clara screamed. The light consumed her, and she dissolved, not in hatred, but in a painful release. Lila fell to the floor, exhausted, but when she looked up, the other spirits were still there, untouched by Clara's disappearance, still screeching with rage. Elias crawled toward her, shaking his hand as he took hers. You can do it, he whispered, his eyes shining as his body disintegrated. But Clara is only a part. The curse is bigger, it takes more than that. Lila looked at him, realizing that one must die to break the curse entirely. She held him, tears falling, knowing that the next moment would decide their fates.